Welcome to the show that puts you in the center of all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. The biggest story in the world, the new Pope, a Midwesterner, introduced to the Vatican. We'll introduce you to Pope Leo XIV and talk to a religious studies professor who knows a thing or two about this whole process and a little bit about the new pontiff. We'll also talk to Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker about the new Pope. They'll also take up a number of other topics: trade deals, the border, the Gulf of America, one step closer to reality. They have a lot to say, and you'll hear from them in just a matter of 10 minutes. And the former president has a lot of people talking after he did a television interview. What Joe Biden said about his vice president's loss, as well as claims that he was slipping away mentally. We begin tonight with a trade war, where President Trump agreed to cut tariffs on British cars, steel, and aluminum. In exchange, the United Kingdom will buy more American beef and ethanol and streamline its customs process for goods from the United States. But here's the thing, that 10% tax against British goods is actually still very much in place. The deal isn't finalized yet. Both sides still working out the fine print. Both sides speaking today, saying they're glad to honor the partnership between the two countries.
It's really an external and an internal bond between our two countries. Will soon be stronger than ever before. And we really do. We have a great relationship. I want to just say that the representatives of UK have been so professional. And it's been an honor doing business with all of them.
In the end, it comes down to, as you say, Donald, economic security is national security. On national security, we've been absolutely the closest of allies for so many years, keeping the peace through that close alliance, that friendship. And now we add to that this deal on trade and the economy. And I want to thank you.
We've been keeping an eye on the stock market throughout this trade war, and all three major indices finishing up today, all in the green. 254. The Dow is up, NASDAQ up 189, the S&P up 32 as well. Now to the biggest story in the world: white smoke emitting from the Sistine Chapel. And about an hour later, the Catholic Church's new leader greets the crowd. We're talking about Robert Prevost, a Chicago native introduced as Pope Leo XIV, becoming the first pontiff from the United States in the church's 2,000-year history. He was elected on the 4th ballot after 2 days of voting. The 69-year-old is a graduate of Villanova University. Those Chicago ties aren't his only Midwest roots, by the way. He actually attended Minor Seminary in Allegan County, which, if you're not familiar, is just south of Grand Rapids. He led the Order of St. Augustine, which works in about 50 different countries, addressing issues like poverty, human rights, social development. Pope Francis sent him to Peru back in 2014. And then just 2 years ago, Francis brought him to the Vatican to head the office that vets bishop nominations from around the globe. Now, we heard from a Macomb County man who happened to be in Italy when the new pope was chosen.
Yeah, that's something that you could probably never plan for, you know, and if, you know, it's just kind of luck on our part to be able to be here. It was a lot of people, man. It was like wall-to-wall people on the road that goes down to St. Peter's Square, and then there was pretty high security, more than other time I was there.
You know, so many of you have something to say about this on our Fox 2 Detroit Facebook page. Here's what some of you are telling us. Jim, thanks for writing in. You say, after hearing the chances were very low there would be an American Pope, this is a pleasant surprise. Mary says his message sounds just like Pope Francis. Thank you, God. David says, God bless you, Pope Leo XIV. And Pat says, God bless Pope Leo XIV. Bring us peace and global unity. Amen. Something all of us can get on board with, those wishes. And just a fun fact about this process, this man, Father Robert Sirico, attended the conclave at the Vatican. You might have seen him on TV giving commentary about the whole process, but some of you might be wondering why we're bringing him up. Others might be thinking, wait, that name sounds familiar. And here's why. He's actually the brother of the late actor Tony Sirico, who fans of the HBO show The Sopranos will remember as mobster Paulie Walnuts. Again, just a fun fact, maybe something that'll help you out the next time you're playing trivia. A lot to unpack with this new pope, with not only his ties, but who he is and which direction he'll actually steer the church. Professor James Noss from Oakland University is in Studio C tonight. He's a history professor and religious studies professor, and it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us. You've been with us every step of the way, bringing us right here to this day of we see the white smoke.
I feel like I live here now. Yeah.
You feel like you have, you've taken up residence here. Listen, this is interesting because you and I just talked the other day, and I said, chances of an American Pope. And many people were saying slim to none.
Yeah, and I said none. just
said
to
none,
be
not
clear,
slim.
I said none.
Yeah.
I said none. But I will plead that the Archbishop of Detroit also said none, and said today that he was wrong. So I'm in good company. Yeah.
I've got to ask you the question though. So we know, and you and I talked about this the other day. There's a statistic that just really sticks with me. It's something like 78% of all Christians will be located in Latin America, Africa, or Asia by the year 2050. Christians.
Yeah.
Did these cardinals, do you think, perhaps consider that there's a decline in the West of interest in Christianity and perhaps Catholicism, and that's why it's needed? We needed a pope from this area. What do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to know exactly what they think, and I suspect the truth is that there's so many things going on in their minds when they're making these decisions. But we also need to remember that although he's an American, he's also a Peruvian citizen. He spent a good chunk of his adult life there. So I think that when you think about it with hindsight, he actually makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, we've talked about where the church needs to grow, that it needs to evangelize. That's happening in Latin America, it's happening in Africa, it's happening in Asia. As the United States becomes more secularized, that number is going down. Perhaps he understands a little bit about how to energize that more.
Yeah, I find your perspective so interesting, because I know that you would consider perhaps Pope Francis having a huge hand in this, in the way that he elevated him before he died. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Francis thought a lot of now Leo the 14th. He was a cardinal relatively late. I think he was made a cardinal in the summer of 2023, about 6 months or so after he was brought to the Vatican. Very recently, before Francis was hospitalized in February, I believe he appointed him. He was originally appointed what's called a cardinal deacon, and then he was elevated to sort of the rank of cardinal bishop, which makes him a little bit sort of more prominent and whatnot. So he clearly thought highly of him, and I think that maybe is reflected in the fact that we got a decision the second day as well. There clearly wasn't gridlock in the conclave.
There's much to be said in a name. Talk for a moment about how this works and how people then choose their names, and what you think about this name.
Yeah, I mean, we've been told that cardinals, every cardinal probably gives it some thought. You have to imagine walking into the conclave, what name would I pick? But I think the name of Leo is quite an interesting one. When you think back to Francis, he sort of broke the tradition actually, and he picked a saint name. He was the first of the Pope Francis. I think Leo is the third or fourth most popular pope name. So it's certainly perhaps a nod towards tradition, and perhaps towards traditionalist Catholics who might be a little bit concerned about some of his other things. And we don't know exactly what Leo inspired him, which of the 13 previous ones, but if we assume that it's Leo the 13th, the most recent one, Leo the 13th is an interesting character. He's pope during the Industrial Revolution, so I think he died in 1903, and he writes the encyclical, which is essentially the foundation for modern social Catholic theory, and he was sometimes known as the social justice pope. He wrote heavily about workers' rights, labor rights, capitalism, immigration, treatment of the poor, and things like that. So it's a significant name.
I also find it interesting that you pointed out in the past that there's nothing new about a pope intersecting or injecting his opinion into public discourse when it comes to politics and social justice. This is something that popes do on the regular. Yeah. However, this particular pope, Pope Leo, has been highly critical of J.D. Vance and also that of President Trump's policies. Talk about how that may impact things.
I imagine this guy's Twitter feed has blown up in the last couple of hours, because I think everybody's looking at it. I mean, this is true. It's easy for us when we're living in a historical period to think that everything's new and revolutionary. But the truth is, he's the 267th pope, I believe, and from nearly the beginning, popes and political leaders have been criticizing one another. So that's nothing new. What is new in 2025 is perhaps the mechanisms by which one can do that, access to things like Twitter. And so, yeah, he has been critical, particularly most recently, I think, of some comments that J.D. Vance made in relation to immigration. And he wasn't just critical. He actually said the vice president is flat out wrong and misunderstood the theology behind that. So when you add that together, I think the signs are pointing towards probably a pope who, like Francis, is going to be pretty outspoken. Remember, he also today in his opening remarks talks about the new mission of the Catholic Church to promote peace in the world. Again, you had in Francis a pope who was pretty outspoken about things like Ukraine and Gaza.
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance, in that criticism coming to the vice president after J.D. Vance had said something along the lines of, we have to look out for our family and then our community and then look at migrants. And I think he said, Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others, is what Pope Leo then cardinal said.
Yes, and I think I haven't seen the actual Twitter post, but if I read it correctly, he also links to a letter that Francis had written, which was pretty critical of that. So, and his criticism of this goes a ways back to actually the first Trump administration as well.
Public policy in one of the greatest nations in the world, and how the Pope sees all of that playing out in the world. That intersection is something that we'll continue to cover, and we thank you for letting us tap into some of your expertise for that here tonight.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time. Good to see you, Professor Nas. We're turning back to the trade deal between the U.S. and Canada. Troy Mayor Ethan Baker and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell on what this means for the auto industry. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Always good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. You know, it's been a wild week of politics, but you could say that every week. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker, who's a Republican but in a nonpartisan role. But on this program, we appreciate all of your perspectives. Thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. We're going to begin in the Vatican. We never get to say that on this show, but we'll begin not in Washington, but at the Vatican. Pope Leo. Your thoughts, Congresswoman Dingell, on the intersection of politics and religion and this new pope?
I was very concerned about who was going to be the next pope and would he continue the legacy of Pope Francis. And while everybody said it could never be an American, I knew I've met the cardinal before. I don't know him well. I know others that have. I was very excited, astounded, shocked, and believe that he truly carries the spirit of what Jesus has taught us, and I hope he will be a bridge to many different faiths, will be a uniter, and will remind us all of the kinds of values that I was certainly taught as a child.
These are difficult conversations in a sense, and I ask you, Mayor Ethan Baker, to kind of step up to the occasion here. When you have Pope Leo talking so explicitly about things like immigration and things like the George Floyd case, you know, he talked about that on his X account years ago, and what he believes leaders should be doing in this world. What responsibility do leaders then have to respond if they are followers?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that first of all, I think everybody is more outspoken, it seems like, every day that we move forward in this country and in this world. So I'm not surprised to know that we have a pope now that's been very proactive on social media and has made big statements about policy issues. And the professor was talking about that's not new to popes and everything. But I think that leaders definitely should be listening to world leaders in any form, whatever that is. Whether or not they take that to heart and follow their lead, you know, that's going to be up to the individual leader. But I'm not surprised by it. I think that, you know, a pope in this country, especially having an American pope, is exciting, no matter if you're Catholic or not. I'm not Catholic. I know you are. I think it's got to be exciting for Catholics throughout this world when there's a new pope, or at least something to look at with interest. But I think that leaders always are going to follow people who have a big microphone, as a pope does, and represent, you know, millions of people. That's important.
President Trump today from the White House lawn was asked what he thought, and perhaps this is a moment that we have where Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is in agreement with President Trump. He said it's a proud moment for America to have a pope. Is this a moment to perhaps unite Catholics across this country?
I hope it's going to unite more than Catholics around not only this country but in the world. I think this man has, today he talked about bringing peace to the world. He is somebody who sees the humanness of every human being, reminds us that we need to take care of the poor. He reminds us of the teachings of the Bible, and I hope he is going to unite us all. We have much more in common no matter what faith we are, and we need to remind ourselves that we have far more that unites us than divides us.
Yeah, and these lines intersect. I'm married to someone who's a Catholic. My in-laws are Catholic, but even my parents, who grew up in India as Hindus, went to Catholic school from nursery school on, and so there's so many connections that we all have in this world. And so let's move forward and talk about these tariffs. The UK today, this is big news coming out of your second home in Washington, cutting tariffs from 27% to 10% on those autos. And in exchange, hey, UK, you got to buy more beef. And we're going to eliminate the steel and aluminum. At the end of the day, do you think this president is doing the right work by simply proposing broad tariffs and then bringing people to the table? Good news?
So I want to say this. I've said, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, tariffs are a tool in the toolbox. And when you're using them on China, I can rationalize it. I really don't know what he did today. It's still not clear. They're still working through a lot of details. I'll tell you something I do know. He exempted Rolls Royces and Jaguars. And again, he talked about how, I mean, the way he even talked about it was like we couldn't build a car like that in the United States. We didn't have workers that could do it. And again, he didn't give any relief to the workers who are buying everyday cars. So Britain's our ally, and I don't like taking on our allies and people that have been our friends for decades, but I don't really know what we got today.
Mayor Ethan Baker, you and I have talked about this president before. A lot of bluster and a lot of big proposals and big ideas. At the end of the day, he's searching for compromise, according to many Republicans. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think that's what deal making's about, and if you want to call him a deal maker, which he is in many senses, that's what's most important to him. You usually get the best deals when you work out something that both parties are going to want. I think we need to move on to Canada. Let's get everything worked out with Canada, so we're not at issue there anymore. I'm thrilled about the UK. They're an ally, obviously, but for here in Michigan, let's focus on Canada next, please, by all means.
Canada's not our enemy.
No.
Well, of course, they've always been. We've never had a hostile relationship with Canada in the history of the two nations. And now you saw that meeting at the White House yesterday, and I do want to ask you, Congresswoman, it looked like they were jousting for a moment, but they seemed to be pretty serious at one point where the British Prime Minister said, wait a minute, Carney said, we're not for sale. What are your thoughts on that whole back and forth between the president talking about making Canada the 51st state?
I don't think Canada should be the 51st state. I don't think it's an appropriate discussion. They've always been an important friend and ally. I say, even as we're talking about the North America trade agreements, we should be treating Canada different than Mexico. They are people that have trade unions, have environmental and safety standards, and a whole lot of other things.
You don't love that conversation.
And they're so interlocked with us.
Well, I mean, you know that,
so
right?
interlocked.
We're totally in agreement on this.
And that's the thing that's really, really difficult to watch. And I was actually had a late dinner with a member of Parliament from Canada last night who was in town for my State of the City address. And we were talking about it. And, he was a farmer by trade before he was in Parliament. And, he sold his tomatoes to Ohio and to all over Michigan and all around. And that whole business, I mean, it's just shocking to him. He's willing to give it a go and see what's going to happen, but they're not a 51st state, but they're closer than they're different than a country far away. I mean, I heard someone say that this is like a civil war between the United States and Canada.
Well, it shouldn't even be a civil war. And I want to say something. If Canadians, the Canadians are not coming across the border they used to travel is going to be down for this year. And more importantly, if Canadians become afraid to cross that border because they don't know how they're going to be treated, our hospitals are going to be in very serious condition in Detroit and Southeast Michigan. So we need to really
We have two bridges now to Canada that are, then the second one's almost done, the Gordie Howe. And you think about the perspective that we have here in Michigan is so different than those who have in D.C. the perspective about Canada. They're our neighbors, and there are neighbors in this country. And so it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward. There's never enough time, but I want to say with the Pope, with the tariffs, with all this stuff going on, we always appreciate having you both of you on. Thank you, Mayor Baker. Thank you, Congressman, for being with us on the Pulse tonight. President Biden taking a look back at the 2024 election, what he says about his vice president's loss and concerns about his own health. They're watching the Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. As we always say, there's never a shortage of political news. You may look away from your phone for just a few minutes. You end up with like 20 notifications. So let's run through some of those notifications. The other big stories we're following right now is starting in the Supreme Court, where the president is asking justices to allow his administration to end humanitarian parole for hundreds of thousands of migrants. That would basically set them up for possible deportation. The move would impact more than 500,000 people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. The administration claims it steps on Homeland Security's authority. The lower court judge who blocked the move said their explanation for ending the program was based on an incorrect reading of law. And speaking of the president, he's pulling the nomination for this man. We're talking about top federal prosecutor in D.C., Ed Martin, defending rioters in the January 6th insurrection. He lost support from a key Republican senator because of that. And there were also concerns about his legal experience and divisive politics. Trump still wants to find a role for him in the administration. And staying on Capitol Hill, where the House passed legislation that would rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America and direct federal agencies to update documents and maps to do the same. President Trump signed an executive order to do this on his first day in office, but that only carries weight in the U.S. It's not clear tonight what will happen to the bill in the Senate. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene sponsored the bill, the fierce Trump ally calling it one of the most important things they can do this Congress. And finally tonight, we're hearing from President Biden about not only his reaction to President Trump's win, but the concern surrounding his campaign for president that ultimately led to him stepping aside. Biden appeared on ABC's The View alongside his wife, Dr. Jill Biden. The president says he takes responsibility for the Democrats losing the 2024 election, saying, simply put, he was in charge. But he had this to say about why his VP lost. Take a listen.
I wasn't surprised, not because I didn't think the vice president was the most qualified person to be president. She is. She's qualified to be president of the United States of America. Right. But I was surprised. I wasn't surprised because they went the route of the sexist route, the whole route. I mean, this is a woman. She's this. She's that. I mean, it really. I've never seen quite as successful and a consistent campaign undercutting the notion that a woman couldn't lead the country, and a woman of mixed race. Yeah. And they played that to a fairly well.
Well, then we'll take you back to the debate between Biden and Trump. After the president's poor showing, there were questions swirling around about if he was still mentally fit for the job. It was this debate that prompted so many people to say he needed to step aside. The president was asked about claims he had a drastic cognitive decline in his last year in office. Here's what he said.
They are wrong. There's nothing to sustain that, number one. Number two, you know, think of what we're left with. We're left with a circumstance where we had an insurrection when I started. Not since the Civil War. We had a circumstance where we were in a position that the pandemic, because of the incompetence of the last outfit, end up over 1 million people dying. 1 million people dying. And we're also in a situation where we found ourselves unable to deal with a lot of just basic issues, and which I won't go into in the interest of time. And so we went to work.
And by the way, once a president, always a president. When Trump wasn't in office, we called him President Trump. That's why we're calling him President Biden. He repeated what he said when dropping out of the race, saying he had to put his country and party ahead of himself, adding he thinks he did a good job his last 6 months in office. That is the Pulse for tonight. By the way, tomorrow we're talking with a realtor about the impact of tariffs on our housing market. And Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio is answering your questions. If you have a question you want to ask either of them, email them to thepulse@fox.com. It comes directly to me and my producing team. You can also scan the QR code on your screen. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you. Have a good night.